Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it's a year since Britain voted to leave the EU. And what a difference a year makes. Or does it? Our two guests of the day, Matthew Elliott from Vote Leave and Lucy Thomas from Britain Stronger in Europe, have made two films giving us their take on the 12 months since Britain voted for Brexit. Let's take a look, starting with Matthew.
A vote to leave will push our economy into a recession.
The most significant event of the past year is something that didn't happen. Project Fear didn't come to pass. Forget Gina Miller's court case or the passage of Article 50. Frankly, you can even forget the general election. What's most significant is the fact that the economy didn't go downhill, which is why 70% of voters still want Brexit to go ahead. This is why I'm confident that Brexit will go ahead as planned. Gerard Lyons was Boris Johnson's chief economist when he was Mayor of London.
Brexit is in long-term best interest of the economy. Project Fear was driven more by politics than economic analysis. Hence, we didn't have the financial Armageddon or economic collapse that Project Fear suggested. In fact, the economy has held up very well over the last year, and the underlying picture, despite the current slowdown, is very positive.
It's true to say that the election increased uncertainty. But now the Brexit negotiations are underway, people will quickly see that a win-win deal is on the table, and that the government is committed to a full, clean and open Brexit, which will be good for the economy and for jobs. The Legatum Institute, where I now work, set up a special trade commission after the referendum. Philippa Stroud is its CEO.
There are real opportunities for Britain as we go through that Brexit process. We can become a global trading partner, we can drive job creation, and we can build a strong economy. But we can actually only do this if we leave the single market and the customs union and take hold of that global trading role.
Some people who want Britain to stay in the EU have used the recent election to suggest that we should stay in the single market. But they conveniently forget that they told voters in the referendum campaign that a vote to leave was a vote to leave the single market. Personally, I agree with Lucy Thomas, who is a leading light of the Remain campaign, who talked during the referendum about the downsides of staying part of the single market, like Norway.
If we were to follow the Norwegian EEA model, that wouldn't have a mandate and it wouldn't achieve the things the Leave campaign say they want to achieve. So we wouldn't be able to stop free movement of people. Norway accepts that. We'd still have to accept most EU rules with no say over them at all, and we'd still have to pay into the EU budget. So it's far worse than the deal we have now.
Both the Labour and Conservative manifestos committed their MPs to a full Brexit, of leaving the single market and leaving the customs union. So it has the overwhelming support of 85% of voters. So now it's up to the government to deliver. What excites me is that Brexit is about more than treaties. It's about the kind of country we want to live in. The general election was certainly a bump in the road, but Brexit is still on track. I'm excited about the future. Our best days are yet to come.
So that was Matthew's view, and here's Lucy's take on events since the referendum.
A year ago today, I was with other Remain campaigners in a room just up there when we found out Britain had voted to leave the EU. We always knew it would be close, but our campaign data showed us we should probably just about be okay. Sound familiar? So a year on from that vote, where are we? Brexit talks have begun and the clock is ticking. But the UK's position and the final outcome are far from clear. Brexit! Although people voted to leave, there was never a detailed plan for what that would actually mean.
Independence Day, fantastic.
And people voted leave for many different reasons. In fact, during the referendum, Leave campaigners revelled in the fact that they didn't have to provide a blueprint. One senior Brexit campaigner told me all he had to do was get people enthused about voting to leave, about Britain's brighter future outside. The finer details of what that actually looks like, well, that's down to the politicians to sort out. In the hastily convened government after the referendum, the new Prime Minister and her colleagues decided amongst themselves what Brexit would look like. Earlier this year, Theresa May spelt out their plan. We'd be leaving both the single market and the customs union. But then there was this.
So, it is a hung parliament.
Another political earthquake. So where does that leave the plans for Brexit? Well, now the parliamentary arithmetic matters. The government may need to change its approach to guarantee the support of enough MPs. Even some of the Conservatives' own backbenchers are saying the general election changed everything.
The inconclusive result from the general election actually was an instruction for the British people to say, you know what, Parliament, actually, you've got to sort this out. And that means that actually that's down to backbench members of Parliament to be asking questions of the government, to be listening to our constituents all the way through this process. And, you know, leaving the EU was about parliamentary sovereignty. Taking back control means taking back control into Parliament. So actually, backbench MPs on all sides have got to step up to the plate now and make sure that we get a most effective, most sensible Brexit for our constituents.
There's also the question of how to avoid a Brexit that's damaging to business. Many in the business community feel their voices haven't been heard over the past year, and now there's real pressure for that to change.
I think we've settled down from that relative shock of the referendum result, but one could argue we've had another shock in terms, of course, of the recent election. And I think that gives, business an opportunity, an emboldened opportunity, just to perhaps realign the debate on Brexit. And by that I mean, just working with government, encouraging government, pushing it if necessary, just to move away from what I think we would call a harder ideological line to a smoother Brexit.
So, a year on from the referendum, and we've started walking towards the exit door. But the terms are still all to play for.
Lucy and William, thank you. Matthew, thank you very much. Just renamed you. Do you think that's true? The terms are all to play for now?
I don't think they are. In fact, I sort of challenge what people like Nicky Morgan said on the film, in the sense that both the Conservative and Labour manifestos made it very, very clear that it was going to be a full, clean Brexit. And in fact, the parties who wanted to fudge things and stay in the single market, like the Lib Dems, the SNP and the Greens, saw their vote share fall.
Right, and it's true, isn't it? 85% of voters voted for the two parties, Labour and the Conservatives, that support Brexit, leaving the single market and leaving the customs union.
Actually, no. So I've got the Labour manifesto, negotiating Brexit, part here. Nowhere does it say we'll leave the single market. It says we will scrap the Conservatives' Brexit white paper, and we will emphasise retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union. So that is trying to retain as free as possible access.
But the Conservatives say that too. Of course, they want exactly the same benefits.
People like Matthew, who say 85% of people voted to leave the single market and customs union, haven't actually read the manifesto. And it's really important to think about what did people vote for, because Nicky is right. The parliamentary arithmetic has changed.
All right, well, let's come on to the parliamentary arithmetic in a moment. But what about that? If Lucy is disputing the fact that the 85% of people who voted for Labour and Conservatives weren't necessarily those Labour voters voting to leave the single market and the customs union.
Elsewhere in the manifesto, in the Labour manifesto, it says we will end freedom of movement. Now, you can't be a member of the single market and not accept freedom of movement. So I think it's quite clear in there. And in fact, people like John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, have also been clear on this.
Right, and Keir Starmer has too. They've said they're going to end freedom of movement, and they've said they would leave the single market.
Several frontbenchers have said it could include staying in the single market. Barry Gardiner, Rebecca Long-Bailey. So frankly, the Labour position is sort of a movable feast, and that the principle remains that they want to retain as free as possible trade with the EU, and it's on a spectrum. And actually, but unlike the Conservatives, my problem with the Conservative position is that they've got a load of red lines. For example, must end ECJ jurisdiction, which gives you all sorts of problems around European arrest warrant, keeping us safe. And we've seen the migrant issues. They've said we will leave the customs union, we will leave the single market. And then you look at things like Northern Ireland and go, oh gosh, what do we do about
let's
the border?
Just be clear on what
should be more pragmatic.
Let's just be clear on the frontbenchers that you've quoted, because Barry Gardiner on this programme, Labour frontbencher, has said if there were to be a reformed membership of the single market, he didn't think that would happen, but basically if they were to change the rules completely, the EU, then they might consider it. But just to be clear, it does say in the Labour Labour manifesto that they will be leaving the single market, they will end freedom of movement. Now the customs union, now the
single market,
but by very dint of ending freedom of movement, you have to have left the single market. In terms of the customs union, now it is true to say that Keir Starmer is now beginning to talk about perhaps there is an arrangement of staying within the customs union. Not saying that they would, but they are going to look at it. Isn't that sensible?
Well, at the same time, he talks about how he's excited about having free trade deals with countries outside of the EU. Now, you can't set up these new free trade deals if you're part of the customs union.
Right. But the Conservative government, Matthew, asked for a mandate on Brexit along the Lancaster House speech as they went into the general election. They lost their majority. So they've lost that mandate, haven't they?
What was interesting about the election was, in some ways, it wasn't about Brexit. It was about a whole host of other issues, not least public services and so-called austerity. I don't think it was really a Brexit election.
Right, but that's how it was billed, and that's certainly how Theresa May wanted it to be viewed. So, as I say, if they lost the majority they had rather than increasing it, then haven't they lost the mandate for the Brexit that she outlined?
I don't think so, because people voted for other parties, namely the Labour Party, who want a pretty much clean, full Brexit.
Right, well, let's look at what might happen in Parliament. You say the parliamentary arithmetic has changed. So what are you expecting those MPs to do? To vote down every piece of Brexit legislation that comes before the House of Commons?
No, I think they'll scrutinise it. I think the exact positions we're sort of yet to see, but the way the legislation will take place is that it isn't one big bang. You've got a separate thing on the customs union because the government itself said this is so complicated we need to give it proper parliamentary time for scrutiny. So there will be a whole load of discussion about the customs union, and as I said before, things like a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. How do you get around that? And for me, it's positive that there will be a lot of time to properly scrutinise these things rather than having one single position of we must do this, we must do this, we must do this. And I genuinely don't know where the numbers are. Talking to people like Nicky Morgan, who was obviously a Remain campaigner.
As were many Tory MPs, of course.
Exactly. I think 185 last time round. It's probably gone down just a little bit given the changes, but I do think it is all to play for, as I said in the film. I think, we are yet to see what there is a majority for. I think certainly no deal is better than a bad deal is out the window now, particularly because of the DUP and others. I think the transitional deal is very interesting. That wasn't mentioned at all in the Queen's speech. Right. And I think the length of that and the terms will also be interesting.
Well, on this no deal is better than a bad deal, do you think that has gone?
I don't think so. I think you can't go into a negotiation without saying that you're prepared to walk away if you don't get a deal. So I think the PM is right on that. What we've seen, though, since the election, I think, is a change of tone. And I think during an election, you do use simpler rhetoric and more stronger statements. Since the election, I'm pleased with the more constructive, consensual tone from both sides.
Right, but do you think no deal is better than a bad deal?
Yes.
You do? So you think it would be better to come out if we can't get the deal that we want and go on to World Trade Organisation rules?
I do.
Why?
Well, you wouldn't go into a negotiation about buying a house or a product.
No, I understand your negotiating stance. What I want you to say is why you think it is better to leave without a deal than have a bad deal.
Well, if, for example, the EU turned around and said, OK, the bill for leaving isn't 100 billion euros, it's 200 billion euros.
But you'd pay 100 billion?
I wouldn't pay 100 billion, no. But if it was 200 billion, I'd walk away.
Right. And less than that, what do you think it should be?
I think you have to look at the whole range of the whole negotiation. Everything from the bill to the question about freedom of movement, the question about the role of the City of London, the EU-UK trade deal. You've got to look at it in the round. Right,
but you would be prepared to pay a reasonably high price to get exactly the same sort of benefits that David Davis talked about when we leave the single market?
Yes.
You would? But you can't put a figure on it at the moment. No. Right. Well, I mean, in that sense, then it does sound like your views aren't that far apart. Matthew Elliott also would like to have frictionless frictionless sort of border trade. And in that case, he wants the same thing as you.
No, but he's saying we have to leave the single market. We have to end free movement. There is no room for pragmatism.
Is that not what the referendum said?
Well, the people voted, do you want to remain or leave the EU? People claiming they knew precisely what every single person voted for. Actually, Matthew, I have a gift on this referendum anniversary
on
day.
the show.
It is a gift from Matthew Elliott, and it's a reminder of what people voted for, and it's a bus saying £350 million a week, because that is what you and your colleagues told people we would get back into this country for the NHS and other priorities. And so I think making assumptions about
All right, well, let's ask Matthew.
Have we seen the 350 million?
Take the bus.
There you go.
Take the bus.
Are you going to put that in the bin when you get home, or are you going to put it proudly on your mantelpiece? But what's happened to the claim? Because the statistics show that actually many people voted on the basis that they might get £350 million a week for the NHS.
Everybody involved in Vote Leave, myself, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Gisela Stewart, since the referendum have been clear that when we get that Brexit dividend from leaving, we would like to see more money for the NHS.
Right. And is that going to be something that you are going to lobby government for?
Yes.
Right. So in the end, you may yet get that money, extra money going to the NHS.
Well, so far we've seen 96% drop in people from the EU applying to be nurses here, which would be perhaps a more honest promise on the side of a bus about the NHS. Let's see. Perhaps let's revisit it once we've left the EU, once it's all done and dusted. How much extra money has there been for the NHS? I would suggest with the economy going the way it's going, it will be less, not more.
All right.
The vote to leave happened in a single day, the moment of truth delivered one mesmerising night this time a year ago. Yet, if anyone believed that decision would shut down debate on Europe, they surely don't now. A year on, this country feels restless, febrile and in deep need of calmer times. In 12 months, we've seen it all. A change of leader, a general election, attacks on our freedom and our way of life, and the kind of human tragedy that makes us question the very values at our core. When we voted for Brexit, we chose to steer this country in a different direction, to tear up, as George Orwell might say, the human mind and put it together in new shapes. Yet suddenly, the trajectory seems anything but clear. So tonight we draw breath. We devote this evening to asking if we are the same country that voted to leave a year ago. And are we more or less divided on what we want? Well, the Brexit referendum, some will tell you, revealed a divided country. Maybe it just revealed those divisions in statistical form. So how do we stand a year on? David Grossman reports.
It's a year since we bought our Brexit. But our flat-packed future didn't come with any instructions as to how to put the thing together or even what it should look like when complete. So have we done little more in the past 12 months than lay the bits out on the carpet and argue about what should go where?
Everything that's happened since the referendum, I would suggest, has compounded those divides rather than healed those divides. We've just had a general election that has seen a big polarisation around age. We've seen youth turnout increase significantly, and we've seen the pro-Remain areas mobilise significantly, much in a way as the Leave areas mobilised. But the map of British politics now, I think, is one that looks far away from a map of a nation that is coming together. It looks more like a map of a nation that is being pulled apart.
Will strengthen my hand in those important Brexit negotiations.
The fact that Theresa May didn't get her majority has emboldened those who campaign to remain to believe that we can end up not with staying in the EU, but with a very different kind of Brexit.
I think were Theresa May have got the overwhelming majority that she hoped for, we would have known more or less what the UK's position was and therefore what the final deal might be. I think the election puts everything into doubt. I think parliamentary arithmetic is not there for the kind of Brexit the government was pursuing, and I therefore think it's all to play for and everything changes.
I don't understand why people on the Remain side feel emboldened, because actually, if you look at the parties who are talking about, for example, staying part of the single market or having a second referendum, parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party and the SNP, their vote share actually went down in the general election. So I don't think people on the Remain side should feel they've got any form of mandate from the election.
Indeed, there's little evidence that the public have changed their minds on Brexit in the year since the referendum. One poll since the general election suggests a more or less even split between Remain and Leave supporters, but around a half of Remain supporters, 26% of all voters, are now dubbed relievers. That is, they think the government now has a duty to deliver on the referendum result. That leaves just 21% of so-called hard remainers who want a second referendum.
I think one key reason why support for Brexit has gone from 52% last year to, I would say, 70% now in the polls is because some of the people who are on the Remain side voted Remain because they feared for the economy. They believed the project fair the government was talking about. And actually now they've seen the economy is doing well and that Brexit hasn't led to a collapse in growth and an increase in unemployment. They're actually quite comfortable with the decision the government's made.
So how can it be that Theresa May doesn't have a mandate for her Brexit plans, but there's no evidence that the British people have changed their minds? Well, the answer seems to be in Labour's extremely nuanced election campaign.
The fascinating thing about Labour's performance at the election is that not only did they see their vote go up typically by around 13 points in the most pro-Remain areas, but their vote also went up by about half that much in the Leave areas. And that's what stopped Theresa May and her team from really converting all of that pro-Brexit Labour territory into Conservative gains that would otherwise offset their losses in places like London. How on earth is that coalition going to be sustained during the Brexit negotiations? Because inevitably Jeremy Corbyn is going to have to stand on the stage at some point and make a firm position on free movement, the single market, the customs union, and so on.
Obviously, Brexit is not just being built by Britain alone, but with the other EU members with whom we are negotiating. Since our election, both the French President and the President of the European Council have suggested that the UK could in fact change its mind. And they will have noted comments this week by the Chancellor Philip Hammond, who appeared to contradict Theresa May's assertion that no deal is better than a bad deal. He, it appears, has in mind a long transitional arrangement.
I think the transition and how we get to any final deal is really now in the frame. The Chancellor Philip Hammond is saying, what do we want those arrangements to be? Because businesses shouldn't have a cliff edge. And I think the length of that transition is also really interesting. It could be 5 years, some are saying up to 10 years, making sure that the transition is smooth, not some knee-jerk change.
But might such a long, lingering goodbye to the EU risk a political backlash?
I think a large portion of the electorate will walk away from this entire exercise feeling even more disillusioned and more frustrated, and I think and fear that that outcome would be the equivalent of pouring gasoline on a populist fire that is already raging.
Hardly anyone is suggesting packing up on Brexit and reversing the decision of a year ago. But the important date to keep in mind is the 29th of March 2019. That's when we leave, by when something substantial has to be built.
And that was David Grossman. Well, Andrea Leadsom was one of the most prominent Leave campaigners. She ran for the Conservative leadership, you'll remember, in the days after last year's referendum, only to be beaten eventually by Theresa May. She's now leader of the House of Commons. And earlier I spoke to her from her constituency in Northamptonshire. I began by asking what she thought of Donald Tusk's allegation that Theresa May's offer risked worsening the situation of EU citizens.
I think that, in fact, what Theresa May made was a very generous offer. But equally, it's obviously going to be important to the EU Commission that they stick to their side of the negotiations, and you wouldn't really expect them to say, thanks very much, that's wonderful. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the days to come.
Isn't it funny, though, when you've got Donald Tusk saying it's not good enough, and last night we had the President of the EU Parliament telling Newsnight he doesn't have a clue what Britain wants from Brexit. Does that worry you?
Not at all, no. As I've said, when you're in a negotiation, you don't immediately jump around clapping your hands with glee at the first sign. In fact, you do the opposite. You say, no, that's not good enough, we need more, and that is what you would expect. And I think
this should be quite a simple one, shouldn't it? This should be a pretty simple place to start, and we are a year on, as you've said, from that vote, and they can't agree with the first thing that they're trying to talk about. You think it's just politics, do you?
Well, you know, Theresa May gave her very initial comments to the meeting of the EU Council to explain to them the generous offer that we will be making, which is right that we should do that. We want to do it. And of course, EU negotiators will start off by saying, you know, that we need to see the detail, it's a good start, but you would expect that. I think we're going to see a lot of the negotiations, and the sort of handling of negotiations is going to be a challenging time, but we are determined to continue with a good relationship with our EU friends and colleagues.
We're weaker than ever before. She's gone to the country, she didn't get the mandate she wanted, and she doesn't have a strong position from which to negotiate. That's the blunt truth.
Well, you know, Theresa May isn't, of course, satisfied with the majority that we managed to get at the last election, but we are the biggest party in government. It's not just our opportunity, but it's also our duty to create a government, to take this country forward, to do everything we can to make a success of leaving the EU. We've done a huge amount of work on preparations for these negotiations. Our hand is very strong.
You've got a negotiating position which is completely unclear. You're hearing that from the President of the EU Parliament. We've got a political system which is unstable. Many believe our economy is unfair. Living standards are falling. What can you point to now and say that's going well?
European politicians are actually very keen that we keep a strong relationship going forward, and that's what we're going to do. And it's actually the elected politicians who are the important thing here. And
come on, Ms Lesam, you haven't even got a deal with the DUP on the table. They're laughing at us and saying they can walk all over whatever she puts up now.
Well, that's blatantly not true, is it? Angela Merkel said it was an interesting start. We had Mark Rutte saying he was quite positive and optimistic about it. We had various different EU politicians, the elected politicians, saying it's a good start. Of course, it's very early days, but it would be helpful. It would be helpful if broadcasters were willing to be a bit patriotic. The country took a decision. This government is determined to deliver on that decision.
Are you accusing me of being unpatriotic for questioning how negotiations are going, questioning whether you have the position of strength that she said she wanted?
I'm not accusing you of anything, Emily. I'm simply saying we all need to pull together as a country. We took a decision a year ago today to leave the European Union.
With this reduced majority, you are now a minority government, but your reading of the public mood is to push on with the same plans for Brexit that you always had. Is that right? Nothing has changed then in your mind?
As the Prime Minister has said, we're leaving the EU, we're not leaving Europe. So our negotiation to deliver a strong deal that works for all of us remains absolutely at the heart of what we're doing.
Do you regret that the election was called?
It's really going to be important. I don't at all. And of course, we don't have the numbers in Parliament. We accept that, and of course, we're disappointed about that. But what it means, it will be a real listening
the whole
government.
Direction of Brexit is now up in the air.
If I can just finish.
That. After this election, you didn't get the Brexit vote that you wanted. You didn't get a huge majority. This was a sign from the country that they were questioning it.
Over 85% of people voted for parties that were accepting of the result of the referendum last year. What we actually now have is a government that will be listening so carefully across parties, hearing what other parties' ideas are, collaborating with them even more closely. We'll be working closely with the devolved administrations to try and get this legislation through.
Andrea Leadsom, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, whether you took your numbers from the side of a bus or read encyclopedically from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the Brexit campaign was brashly and noisily centred around the economy. Remainers told us it would tank, Brexiteers told us it would soar. A year on, the pound has slumped, manufacturing has jumped, the markets are up, but so is inflation. So what exactly has the prospect of Brexit done to us? Our policy editor, Chris Cook, brings his charts to it.
The economic consequences of Brexit will take years to play out. But what can we say about what's happened so far? First, GDP. These figures show quarterly growth. Now, it hasn't been terribly quick lately, and things have slowed down a little recently. But behaviour since June last year is not markedly different to what went before. You get a similar pattern if you look at unemployment. It was drifting down before last June. It's drifting down now. That's all quite cheering. The biggest economic consequence so far, though, has been monetary. Sterling dropped down a step in June last year, and despite recovering a little, it remains 12.5% below the position it held in the month before the referendum. Cheaper sterling makes imports more expensive, and so one consequence of that is higher inflation. This is the annual rate of change in the Consumer Price Index, which has shot up to nearly 3%, and that in turn has an effect on wages. Once you take account of that inflation, this graph shows how fast wages have been growing, and in recent months we've returned to falling living standards. This is hardly unprecedented. In recent years, sluggish or negative pay growth has been one of our top problems. The Brexit vote, though, seems to have rekindled that source of pain.
Chris Cook, so time to take stock and look at if we're the same country that voted to leave 12 months ago. Is the optimism of the Brexiteers and the scepticism of the Remainers where it was? Shall we put those terms to bed once and for all? Well, joining me now, the writer Jonathan Friedland and Kerry-Ann Mendoza, editor of The Canary, who both voted Remain, Tim Martin, chairman of Wetherspoons, and Robert Toombs, the historian who voted to leave the EU. And it's a real pleasure to have you all here. And Tim, I'm going to start with you because you wrote frequently for Wetherspoon News. I remember you played as big a part, really, as anyone in this debate. Do you think you led people, your customers, people who read Wetherspoon News, to the right direction?
Well, I would hope that we did. I think that in Wetherspoon News, which is read by a couple of million people, we put the views of Remain as well as the views of Leave. So I think we presented it fairly. I'd love to think we decided the election, the referendum and the election
But your
result,
voice, your editorial voice was very strong, wasn't it, in bringing people with you on the road to Brexit?
Yes, it's just very difficult to say how many I brought. A lot of people think if I say something, they do the opposite. So
Fair enough. Kerry-Ann, do you see yourself now as a reliever, or would you say that the defining question is no longer whether we're in or out? Do you feel that we've moved on from this now?
I think we've got bigger questions to answer right now. You know, we've got Theresa May, who called this election saying that she needed a mandate to be able to conduct these negotiations. She's now manifestly lost that mandate. She said the alternative was a coalition of chaos. That's another broken promise we can add to the list, because now we've got the chaos, utter chaos, no coalition. And, you know, the Conservative government in recent years has delivered us a zombie economy. Now we have a zombie government clinging on to power with its cold, dead hands. We're told by people around Theresa May that she has a profound sense of duty. I think if that's true, she needs to do the dutiful thing now and resign, allow the Conservatives to pick a new leader and us to have a general election.
Remainer has become a different sort of debate. It's about values, it's about austerity. It's not really about our connection to the EU anymore. Does that worry you or delight you?
No, I think roads all come back to that, to the fundamental question of our relationship with Europe. That's still going to be the dominant question, partly because we've got a government who is committed to extricating us from the European Union on a timetable that now looks unrealistic. But the climate of the country, I think, has changed in a very big way. Just to think of two very practical examples. The first one is the election of Donald Trump, which I think you referred to in the introduction. If you imagine that choice had been posed now, we'll leave the European Union and trade with our natural friends across the Atlantic with America. That was one kind of argument when it was Obama in the White House, completely different argument with Trump there. People would react to it differently.
So you think if they'd been the other way round, we would have got a different answer?
Well, that's too big a claim, but it's hypothetical, but the climate would have been different. And the second big thing is young people. That we know from on June the 8th, they did turn out in big numbers, and we know that on June 23rd, 2016, they didn't in anything quite comparable numbers. Had they, we know that their inclination was towards Remain. So just those two facts alone mean the climate has changed. And I think just one of the most powerful things that was said in the campaign was from somebody on the Leave side, David Davis, who said a democracy has the right to change its mind. Otherwise, it's not a democracy.
Right. And there are these, Robert, impish overtures from European leaders now saying the door is still open, we can, everyone's I can be a dreamer. Are they trying to stir trouble? What do you hear of that? Or are they saying you can treat this still as a democracy and change your mind again? How do you read that?
Well, I think the EU leaders are, of course, we often forget this, are thoroughly committed to the EU as an idea, and it's very difficult for them to understand that we might not be. So I think of course, the EU has a record of getting countries to change their minds once they've voted. And so I think it's perfectly natural for them to think that we, like the Dutch, the French, the Danes, might change our minds. I mean, they're also, I'm sure, trying to weaken the government's bargaining position. They're obviously not going to offer us any more than they have to. And that's why I think the danger of our present situation is this appearance of uncertainty. If you're uncertain, then the people who disagree with you are going to take advantage of it.
Do you not think, though, Robert, that the key issue in most people's minds at the moment is we've had a referendum on if we Brexit, but no one has had a chance to vote on the Brexit that's actually going to happen. You know, the negotiations have already started, still with the British public completely in the dark about what Brexit looks like. Surely shouldn't there be another democratic intervention down the line
you two
where
wouldn't
people
object
get
to that?
to
Would
actually
you
give
vote
that
at the
Brexit
end
deal a
if we
mandate?
The thing about another vote is the decision was subcontracted to the people to say, do you want to stay or do you want to leave? Mm-hmm. They voted to leave. They couldn't have known the exact terms, and the government today can't know the exact terms. But I think people make too much of what the exact terms are going to be.
That's a massive difference, isn't it? Because it's the difference between, do you want to move house? Yes. But do you want to move into this house?
It's a big difference.
And then if people, once people decided to move house, that's a decision. But then they would never buy the next house without seeing it. They'd have to look around it
but
first.
They took that risk, didn't they? And you have to admit that people said, we haven't seen the house, we're moving. What you're pointing to now is still this sense of division very much in the country, and I'm wondering whether you think we are any closer to reconciliation now, a year on, or whether you think post that election it feels wider than ever.
Well, I think it depends on getting decent terms, getting a deal with the EU that most people feel that is acceptable. In that case, it seems to me that's the only thing that can bring about reconciliation. As your piece showed, the number of people who are absolutely determined to stay in the EU or to try to are quite a small proportion of the population. The majority were either for leave or were at least lukewarm about the EU and were afraid of the economic consequences. If we get a solution that shows that the economic consequences are fairly okay, then I think that the fear and the rejection of the idea of Brexit will largely disappear.
And I think you're talking very rationally, but when you hear, for example, a politician aligning patriotism with support for Brexit negotiations, I'm wondering, I don't know what you feel.
It's an incredibly unhelpful contribution. I think the whole language, in fact, that this referendum has been conducted in has been appalling. You know, you can't go around calling people who voted Brexit ignorant bigots, you know, and people who voted Remain unpatriotic elitists. I know, I really feel that way. I think, you know, there were legitimate reasons to vote Brexit, there were legitimate reasons to vote Remain, and now all of us should be working together to get
I want to say something about your...
deal.
I agree with that, but I want to say something about your national reconciliation point, because in a funny way that was beginning to happen even on the Remain side, where people were thinking, look, she's about to win a majority of 150, people know that she's going to negotiate a hard Brexit, people like Carrie-Anne and me, we're just going to have to get with the programme. Then the result of this election came through where she didn't talk about anything else in this election, she offered no other positive programme, she said, give me this mandate, and the country said, no, we're not giving you a mandate. Well, that's bound to encourage people like me.
The country, of course, because 85% of people voted for parties which were pro-Brexit.
So you hear it as a pro-Brexit vote, and you hear it as a soft Remainer vote,
well,
right?
I just think that you can't read anything, unfortunately, from my point of view, into the Labour vote, because Labour's position was both at once.
It was
manifesto,
both Remain and Leave. They were pro-Brexit, and that's why they did one of the reasons they did very well, as they admit.
Except you see, that was the reading initially. People thought, they've done well because people have split 50-50. Actually, you notice that only 18% of former UKIP voters went to Labour. And Labour surged in Remain seats.
What's UKIP in the whole thing? Both the main political parties in their manifesto said we're pro-Brexit, and 85% of people voted for them. You can't turn around now and say there's doubt about whether the country is pro-Brexit. That's unrealistic.
I don't know, maybe there's an element of hypocrisy happening on both sides, because I think, you know, the Brexit...
You've been very conciliatory tonight, Kerry. I haven't heard this view.
She's a moderate centrist, as you can see on this issue.
Contrary to popular opinion, Jonathan. But, you know, I don't think, you know, Brexit, you know, the whole Brexit argument was predicated on the idea of democracy. It was about taking back control, about the British public having their say.
Yes.
So I don't think we can then say it's somehow anti-democratic to give the public another say when they've seen the small print.
Did Remainers feel that they were pulling against the national mood? Was there an embarrassment before the election that has now changed? I mean, you would have been quiet about the fact that you were, maybe not quiet, but Remainers would not have felt comfortable saying, I still disagree with it.
Yeah, because it sounded as if you were trying to turn the clock back and defy
and what you're saying is it doesn't anymore.
And I think what the election showed that everything is up for grabs. Everything is very fluid. There's a big argument going.
You've sort of seen the trajectory of history, and do you see this as another turning point?
Unexpected. Yeah. Well, a sort of turning point, or it could be a turning point. I mean, I think the problem is of now uncertainty. I mean, I agree, OK, democracy is a wonderful thing, we all agree with that. But think in practice what would happen if you were to have a second vote. All of our partners in the EU would say, well, look, these people don't know what they want, give them a hard deal and they'll vote to stay in, which is what they would really like. We don't control the terms of the outcome, of course. And hence, to start saying we have to vote on the outcome means that we shall almost certainly get a bad outcome. That's what I...
But what's the alternative, Robert? Is to say, well, we'll go to negotiations, get a terrible deal anyway, and we'll just have to...
There is no terrible deal that we can get. There's no terrible deal that we can get. The worst deal you can get is to trade on World Trade Organisation.
Which is a pretty bad deal.
That's a very bad deal.
It's not a bad deal.
That's not a bad deal. It's the basis on which we trade with America, China, India.
Yes, but 44% of our exports aren't reliant on America. You know,
the question about the deal is almost the most impossible one, isn't it? Because we just don't know. But I want to bring us back to a sense of national mood, because we are in a place now where it feels like wave after wave, a period of national shocks, whether it's political earthquakes, whether it's security scares, whether it's human disasters, leaving many questioning our values now. Do you feel, as you sit here tonight, that there is a bright future for this country, a sort of cohesive place that we are going? Briefly.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, I think. There is no reason to think that the country is in a long-term crisis. I agree with Jim. There is no reason to think that the outcome of these negotiations will be economically damaging. If we stick to our guns, perhaps that's too military a metaphor, if we follow a sensible and decent negotiating strategy, there's no reason to think that we shouldn't have a good outcome.
I just think one of the big arguments after the referendum and during it was the notion that there were two tribes in this country. There was the sort of anywheres who were urban and cosmopolitan, and there were the somewheres who still had British values of community. Now, we've seen in the last month in areas that would have been labelled classic anywhere areas, Finsbury Park, Grenfell Tower, that area, diverse, multilingual, multicultural community. Those are real communities where people really pull together. Yeah. There is no monopoly on patriotism or community or British values on the somewhere side or the anywhere side.
On that note, we must end. Thank you all very much for coming in. Thank you.